Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you that most people don't know? Please remember to like, share, hype, and subscribe.
A kid was found badly beaten, naked except for his shirt, and hanging from a coat hook on the wall in one of my school's lunchrooms. The police and school all declared it was a freak accident, and that he'd somehow done it all to himself. I just can't believe that a kid somehow stripped himself almost completely naked, beat himself up, and hanged himself all by accident. And everything the school did surrounding the incident made no sense. The only teacher who openly questioned the story was immediately fired. The dead kid's siblings were expelled. Yes, it was an expulsion, not the parents pulling them. Then were formally expelled before the parents could withdraw them. I have been in touch with one of them on Facebook. Another, much older kid that was known for violently bullying little kids, dead one included, suddenly stopped attending after the death, and no one knew where he went. K-12 school, so we had little kids in the same campus as teenagers. I've always thought that the violent kid finally went too far and accidentally murdered one of the victims. I'm not the only one who attended the school at that time and suspected this either. So, in the little country town I grew up in, there was this funny little house down near the rail lines with an old dude living there. Every day you'd see him go out and empty the kettle in his yard and go back inside, but never saw him out of his house, but everyone knew of the dude. Anyway, one day the house was demolished, no real estate signage or anything. Just woke up one day and there was a dozer pushing it down. A few people had asked what happened to old mate that was there. Did he move out or something? Turns out, he died making a cup of tea like 3 decades prior. House was just a shell inside, totally gutted. No one had been there, and no signs at all of squatters. But the whole town would see the dude empty his kettle every bloody day. There's been a series of murders in my hometown. In 2013, a police officer was driving back home after his shift ended at about 2 or 3 a.m. He encountered a tree branch in the middle of an old off-ramp. When he gets out to move it, he's ambushed with a shotgun and murdered, no suspects. Not too long after that, a teacher and her daughter were murdered in their home, no suspects. We did recently get a conviction for a different case. A mother of 5 disappeared and left all her stuff in her car on the side of the highway. They got her boyfriend and some other dude for that. But her father was mysteriously murdered about a year or so after she disappeared. They think the boyfriend may have had something to do with that too, but so far, no one has been charged. My neighbor went missing at our mailbox, literally at the mailbox, checking his mail. He was never seen again. That mailbox was the last place he was seen alive. We worked at the same place even. I'm really the only local that's invested in it. I'm in law school for criminal law now, and the case just absolutely puzzles me. How do you go missing checking the mail? This one's a little bit lighthearted compared to any responses that discuss serious topics, but nonetheless, it's a rather odd and perplexing story. When I was very young, my mother was the manager of a McDonald's in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Her store had I think, mannequin or maybe an animatronic puppet of Ronald McDonald. I can't remember which, but just remember that it was a human-sized Ronald. One night, someone broke into the McDonald's and stole the Ronald dummy. About a week later, its headless body was discovered at a gas station several miles away. Ronald McDonald's severed head has never been found. This was maybe 1992 or so. Over 45 years ago, a guy in a green Bedford van picked up his girlfriend from her house in northern Sydney, heading up north, and they were never seen again. Weirdly, about 5 years ago, someone reported finding a similar van in the bush, in the wrong direction, and reported it. The police didn't manage to get out there before a massive bushfire came through and destroyed it. As a kid, my friend lived on a hill overlooking a field. One night the whole sky lit up at 3 a.m., so his mom went outside to look and she saw someone dumped a car and lit it on fire. The next day after school, we had to go check it out and investigate, as curious middle school boys do. The cops had already removed the wreckage, and we were just checking out the random car bits left over, thinking we were detectives or something. I picked up a piece of chrome window trim, and there was a charred blob of burnt rubber stuck to it. I started prying it apart to peel the rubber off, and a piece snapped off, and inside was a knuckle joint. I was picking up a burnt human hand, encased in the burnt rubber from the window seal. We ran the hell out of there and didn't tell anyone, because our friend's mom told us not to go there and we didn't want to get in trouble. We never saw anything in the newspaper. It was one of those suburban towns that always makes lists for being a super safe town. As an adult, I realized they just don't publish the crime and sweep it under the rug.
It's a really tough situation when you're trying to be polite, but also your body language is saying like, this is the extent of it, and I don't want anything more to do with you besides this transaction. And people just don't see it, or they're just oblivious to nonverbal cues or even verbal cues. That's scary. And then these people have access to where you live. You gotta really pick your battles, and hopefully these car companies are doing a good enough screening that they can filter through some of the bad elements. But anyway, glad you're okay.
In 1973, a woman and her 2-year-old son were beaten to death with a hammer while her husband was at work and their 5-year-old twins were at preschool. The twins found their mother and brother when they were dropped off at school. Police interviewed hundreds of people, including my uncle. He and my aunt moved out of state a few days after the murder. And yes, he had an actual alibi. The murderer was never found. Still creeps me out every time I drive by that house when I go home to visit. I've talked about this on Reddit before. I live in a small town in northern Michigan, and one March evening in 1974, a local high school kid named Perry had a minor fender bender downtown. He'd had some minor scrapes with the law, and he panicked and fled the scene before the police arrived. They found his car parked along the freeway several miles south of town. The motor was running, but he was nowhere to be found. He was never seen again. About 20 years later, his brother got a phone call. The caller didn't identify himself, but he mimicked cartoon voices, the way that Perry and his brother had done when they were kids. Then he hung up, and that's the last word on the case. Rural India. Back when I was a kid, our village was not as developed in terms of infrastructure. One thing you need to know about people from the rural South is that they're extremely religious and have ceremonies for all sorts of things. This is important for context. On one of these festival weeks, we decided to visit the old temples for prayers. The road there wound round a hill and went pretty deep into the forest. This, coupled with it being monsoon season, meant we took an easy 3 hours to get there. One thing about monsoons in India is that, bizarrely, some villages get rains more than the others, even if they're a few kilometers apart. So we went from a lightly cloudy village to something straight out of twilight. We could barely see the road ahead of us. The driver somehow took a wrong turn. I still don't know how. Most hilly roads are one way, and we ended up even deeper in the forest. Keep in mind, it's so dark, we thought it was evening, despite it being early afternoon. We found a few houses there, and the driver decided to ask around for directions. No dice. All of them were abandoned, but weirdly they seemed well kept. Okay, maybe the residents have gone to some festival ceremony, but from this deep in the forest? Plus, this was before Google Maps, so our GPS didn't have a stable network. Driver decided to try his luck through this settlement. My parents are getting increasingly worried as timing is important in rituals. I'm at the back, starving. Pre-ritual breakfasts are ass. The road gets increasingly shabby, but the driver pushed through. I noticed the trees were slowly looking decayed, like they were dark brown and the leaves were drooping low. I also noticed a distant lack of birds. I was from the city, so country birds were special to me. Then we just hear a noise. like a whistling, singing combo. Keep in mind, this is a hilly forest, so maybe it's the wind, maybe it's the forest itself. It's been years, but I remember that sound. My parents are now scared that there's a large animal stalking us. Unlike Americans, we couldn't carry arms. My dad urges the driver to turn back, but he says he knows the road from here, a blatant lie. He could drive us out. Besides, getting back meant losing fuel. The sound gets softer and louder, and at times seems like it's coming from the car itself. And then we see weird shit. I don't remember it exactly since I was a kid, but it seemed like things were dangling from the trees overhead. Dilapidated things. It's dark, so I was told it's monkeys, but we have absolutely no idea at that point. I remember my head hurting really bad. The driver eventually found his way out, but looked worried. We ditched the temple's idea and drove home. He stopped by a cafe for chai and asked around in our native language. I found out years later that we had driven through a black magic area of the forest, a place where practitioners congregate to perform old rituals, things our culture finds dangerous. Apparently, we were the first ones to go through that area. Most locals stayed away. Look, a lot of it was rumors, but we couldn't understand how there was an entire road through it. The locals said the usual. The forest is alive, give it respect. But how could the forest magically conjure a road through it? Plus, if there was a road, wouldn't the government have gone through the area and fixed it up? Also, I was told the sound was spirits trying to entice us to leave the road or stop. Our family living there moved, so now we don't go to that village, but I remember it being a famous legend in the area, which my parents didn't know as they were from the city. I think they expanded the roads there later. Also, if anyone nitpicks, in India, we consider such villages to be hometowns more than cities, since our ancestors or older relatives had built strong communities there. Our first Halloween in our new hometown, we had two people covered in dark purple sheets barge into our living room and sit down on our couch. They gave us a card saying we had 3 tries to guess who they were. We guessed, and supposedly we were wrong, and they got up and walked out without a word. Scared the hell out of my mom. I've come to find out it's something called bell snickling, but to this day we still don't know who the hell they were. In my town or county, we have a population of roughly 65,000. We have 50 missing people, countless unsolved murders. The police, DA, judges, etc. here are just evil, awful humans. I wish that was as bad as it got. It isn't. My friend Tony was having a psychotic break. He had just lost his dad, so he was arrested during a well check. The sheriff and arresting officers promised Tony's mom they were going to take him to get help mentally. They never did that. Instead, they put Tony in the drunk holding tank for 2 weeks. He was kept in there with sewage water coming in from the floor drains, and they had the temp set all the way down with freezing cold air blowing in there constantly. They used to do this for a few minutes at a time as a quick way to help sober someone up years ago. He was in those conditions for 2 weeks with no clothes, no bed, no blanket. He was beaten, tased, starving. There's a video of him begging for water, and the officers are laughing and pointing at him. He ultimately died from hypothermia. Sadly, Tony wasn't the first one to be treated this way. It's just the first time the public found out. An officer saw the security footage and exposed what happened to Tony. She was then being threatened and followed by the police, until the sheriff fired her and she moved away from this place. Some of the officers involved have taken slapped on the wrist plea deals. The story only scratches the surface of how evil this place is. This isn't a creepy story from my hometown, but from a place where I went to university. Picture a small, quiet, sometimes even boring medieval town as the backdrop for the story. In 1998, the concierge of a university dormitory was murdered at night, brutally attacked with multiple blows from an axe. Her body was then dumped in the dorm's laundry room. The killer appeared to have struck her with hatred and staged a robbery. taking only the few coins she had in her wallet. Unfortunately, the investigation was conducted disgracefully. Many pieces of evidence and the killer's fingerprints were damaged or contaminated, which meant the culprit was never caught. The creepy detail, besides the fact that it was almost certainly someone local, is that the composite sketch that was made, a student returning to the dorm late at night had bumped into the likely murderer, looked strikingly similar to a man I knew by sight, who had always had a reputation for being violent. My sister bought a 5-acre wooded lot next to our mom's house from the last who lived on the next 5-acre lot next door. She was getting divorced. She told my sister that her husband had brought Russian girls in the guise of maids and killed them, buried them on his lot. His lot was also heavily wooded. She built a house on her lot and sold it. We looked at his lot and couldn't really see anything like mounds, but were too scared to wander over there in the woods and didn't want to open a can of worms before she sold the spec house. Plus, he was still living there, and our elderly mom was living in her house alone on 5 heavily wooded acres in the middle of nowhere. In the 30 years he lived next to our mom's house, we had one interaction with him when he complained about the noise. Brother was in a metal band and had band practice in the basement for several months. Periodically, I think I should say something, but the police out there are incompetent hillbillies. I tried to create a mystery. A friend went to a dozen proms and saved all her dresses. When she decided to get rid of them, I took them to a park, like a forest preserve or a state park, and hung them in a circle. Took a few pictures, and then just left them there. Came back a few times. They were still there. Then they weren't. Nothing was ever said about it, but I'm sure the person who took them down wonders. This was less a mystery, but a surprise most wanted case that got solved in my hometown. A woman who was involved in a bank robbery murder in 1970 related to the Black Panther movement ended up a fugitive and hid out for decades in my town. My dad knew her through his job. I think he had a crush on her. He talked about her a lot. One night she hosted a small party for her friends and confessed to everyone what she'd done, that she was going to turn herself in. I thought it was interesting that she told her friends first. Dad wasn't there, but it was a small enough town that everyone knew. It made the news once she officially turned herself in. She went to prison, and etc. I think she came back to town after prison to get her degree and stuff. While living in the town, she was just a normal woman. Nobody would have thought she'd have been involved in a crime like that. The house on the corner of the 2 main roads in our town, it's an older house built in the 1950s. It's all yellow. Exterior paint, shutters, etc. There's an Oldsmobile in the carport. Even that is a yellow-beige color. Its wheels covered in cobwebs. Every night, like they're on a timer, the lights in the living room turn on. Every week the yard is trimmed and carefully edged. But the car is never moved. The door never opens. No one actually lives there. I first heard the rumors in middle school. There was an older couple who paid thousands of dollars to cryogenically freeze their brains. They paid years in advance for their house to be taken care of so that it would still be there when they were woken up in the future. The bars on each window is what makes me believe it. No one can break in and loot their relics from a bygone era. Something one would only think if they were leaving a building alone for a long time. A protection an average suburban home wouldn't need. I've asked around for years. No one knows who owns that home. No one has ever seen the owners. Not even a glimpse of how the grass is cut each week. It's been a mystery, with the legend passed down from 7th grader to 7th grader, only to grow as old as the paint that covers the unused mailbox. It's a house frozen in time. A small vortex of mystery in the shape of an ordinary ranch-style home. Who knows? Maybe one day, in the distant future, an older couple will walk through the solid oak door again to find their lives just as it was the day they left. A young woman in our town died unexpectedly. It took the better part of the year, but the toxicology report came back that she had died of thallium poisoning. It got a brief mention in the paper, then nothing.
Thallium poisoning is very rare, and it was considered a suspicious death. There's never been any mention of a case, cold or otherwise. It's like nobody cares at this point. It's been at least 10 years, and I'm pretty sure no progress on the investigation. I feel like her death was unremarkable to the community because she didn't come from a prominent family, and I know this sounds harsh, but she wasn't the typical standard of feminine beauty. Smart, pretty, well-known family? You get a giant investigation. Otherwise, it just seems like everyone said, meh, and forgot about it. I remember, though. I grew up in a small town in Texas called Azle. There are two mysteries that come to mind. First took place not even a 5-minute drive from my childhood home. This took place either late 90s or early 2000s. A teenage girl told her mother she was going to hang out with some friends. She was found deceased on top of a gravel pit. The case got so little coverage and very few informations can be found. My guess is somebody had friends in high places and covered it up. Second is a little juicy. I worked at this local Italian food place for a work and briefly knew the manager and owner. He came all the way from Italy and had friends all over town. I found it strange he paid his employees in cash. I quit after a week and forgot about him. Years later, I saw in the local news that he had been found shot in the woods while out hunting. Word around town was he had connections to organized crime and had run afoul of them. My uncle married a lady when she was young, I think 9 to 12. I don't remember the exact age. Her younger sister was kidnapped out of the front of the family's yard. The sister was by herself and no one saw who picked her up. This was probably early 60s when it happened. Years later, a guy confessed to kidnapping, killing, and disposing of her body outside of this little out-of-the-way state park in South Carolina that's surrounded by woods on the Catawba River. When I was young, my family had moved to this little neighborhood just outside of this park when the guy confessed. I remember area news crews, search patrols, police flying up and down this backcountry road for about 2 weeks. Nothing was ever found, and if the guy did dispose of the body, it had to have been there for 20 years or so, as he didn't confess until the 80s. I think everyone figured animals devoured the carcass, and any remains were buried under years of pine needles. My little brother and friends would scavenge the woods after the excitement faded, in hopes we could find something, but alas, we did not. Seriously, look up Iron County, Upper Michigan, most rural county in the entire state, and Kelly Cochran. We don't have a real crime rate here, but we did have a cannibal. Also, she fed some of her victims to neighbors during a barbecue. Also, they never found all the pieces she scattered in the most rural county in the entire state's forest. Also, her main victim had parked his car at a local park and ride on the highway, and we, including the police, drove past it every day for a year before they realized it. She's in prison, but there are a lot of unanswered questions. Crazy shit.